The cargo hauler Persistent Dream shuddered as another micrometeor struck its already battered hull. Captain Sarah Chin gripped the pilot's seat harder, watching the damage reports cascade across her screens like red digital rain. 3 months into what should have been a simple supply run to the outer colonies, and everything that could go wrong had gone spectacularly wrong. Hull breach in Section 7, announced Marcus Webb, her engineer and the closest thing to family she had left. His weathered hands danced across the repair controls, sealing another crack in their floating home. That's the 15th one this week. At least it's not Section 5, called out Dr. James Harrison from the medical bay, his voice carrying the dry humor that had kept them sane during their worst moments. I just finished patching the last hole there. Sarah allowed herself a bitter smile. The Persistent Dream had been her father's ship, then, hers after the Vega colony plague took him. She'd promised herself she'd keep it flying until her dying day, but some days that promise felt more like a curse. Especially when the Galactic Trade Commission kept assigning them routes through sectors that technically weren't war zones, just areas where minor skirmishes occasionally broke out between alien factions. Sarah, you need to see this, Marcus called, his voice suddenly serious. He was staring at the long-range scanner, his expression puzzled. I'm picking up debris about 2,000 kilometers off our starboard bow. It's big. Really big. She unbuckled herself and drifted over to his station. The scanner showed a massive debris field, chunks of metal and composite materials scattered across several thousand cubic kilometers of space. But there was something else, something that made her heart sink. Those are Krillian hull signatures, she said quietly. The Krillians were one of the galaxy's most feared warrior races, standing 8 feet tall with natural armor plating and a military tradition that went back millennia. Their ships were legendary for their durability and firepower. If a Krillian battlecruiser had been destroyed here, whatever did it was something she wanted to avoid. There's more, Marcus said, adjusting the scanner's focus. I'm detecting a faint power signature in the center of the debris field. Something's still active out there. James floated up behind them, his medical bag automatically clipped to his belt even in zero gravity. Could be survivors. Could be a trap, Sarah countered, but even as she said it, she was already changing course toward the debris field. It was the human curse, her father had always said. They couldn't see something in distress without trying to help, even when helping might get them killed. As they approached the wreckage, the scale of the destruction became apparent. The Krillian battlecruiser had been massive, easily 10 times the size of their little cargo hauler. Now it was spread across space in twisted chunks of metal, some pieces still glowing with residual heat from whatever weapon had torn it apart. There, Marcus pointed at his screen. The power signature is coming from that section near the ship's former stern. Looks like part of the engineering deck survived intact. Sarah maneuvered the Persistent Dream carefully through the debris field, using the ship's manipulator arms to push aside smaller pieces of wreckage. The closer they got to the active section, the more her unease grew. The damage patterns were unlike anything she'd seen before. The metal wasn't just torn or melted, it was somehow twisted, as if reality itself had been bent around the ship. Whatever hit them, it wasn't conventional weapons, James observed, studying the wreckage through the viewports. This looks almost organic. They reached the intact section after an hour of careful navigation. It was a roughly cylindrical piece of the ship, about the size of a city bus, with its own atmosphere containment still functioning. Emergency lights blinked weakly through small viewing ports, and Sarah could see movement inside. Life signs, she asked. Marcus ran a detailed scan. Negative for Krillian life signs. But there's something else in there. The computer can't identify it. Sarah made her decision. Bring us alongside. We're going aboard. Sarah, James said gently, we don't know what's in there. The Krillians were running from something when this happened. Maybe we should just report the wreckage and move on. She turned to face her 2 oldest friends, these men who had followed her to the edge of civilized space and never once questioned her judgment. When has that ever been the human way? Marcus grinned. Never. James, get the portable atmosphere suits ready. We're going on an adventure. The docking procedure took another 30 minutes. The Krillian section didn't have a compatible airlock, so they had to use their emergency docking tube and hope the seal would hold. Sarah suited up alongside her crew, checking her equipment twice. Whatever was in there had survived the destruction of one of the galaxy's most powerful warships. It deserved their respect, if not their caution. The interior of the Krillian section was a maze of twisted metal and sparking electronics. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on walls that had been designed for beings much larger than humans. Sarah led the way, following the faint power readings toward the center of the intact area. The air is breathable, James reported, checking his atmospheric scanner. Oxygen-nitrogen mix, slightly higher CO2 than we prefer, but we could survive without suits if needed. They moved deeper into the wreckage, past storage compartments filled with Krillian military supplies and personal effects. Sarah couldn't help but feel like they were walking through a tomb. Somewhere out here, an entire crew of proud warriors had died defending their ship against something that had torn through their defenses like paper. Power sources just ahead, Marcus whispered, though there was no need for quiet in the empty section. They rounded a corner and stopped. In front of them was a reinforced chamber with thick transparent aluminum viewing panels. Inside, barely visible in the dim emergency lighting, something moved. Sarah approached the chamber carefully, her helmet light piercing the gloom. What she saw inside made her gasp. It was definitely alive, but unlike anything in the xenobiology databases. About the size of a large earth dog, it had 4 legs and a distinctly canine-like build, but its hide was a shifting pattern of dark scales that seemed to absorb and reflect light in strange ways. Its head was elongated, with ears that moved independently and eyes that glowed with a soft blue phosphorescence. But it was clearly injured. One of its legs was bent at an unnatural angle, and there were deep gashes along its side that leaked a luminescent fluid. It lay curled in the corner of the chamber, breathing slowly and deliberately, as if each breath was a tremendous effort. "What is it?" James asked, moving up beside her. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "it's some kind of war animal. Look at the chamber setup, food dispensers, waste recycling, even what looks like exercise equipment scaled for a quadruped. The Krillians were keeping this creature as some kind of military asset. And they left it behind when they evacuated," Marcus added, his voice angry. "What kind of warriors abandon their own animals?" Sarah studied the chamber's control panel, using her translation device to decipher the Krillian script. According to this, its designation is Combat Unit 47. Species, Shadows of Zerath. Status. She paused, her translation device struggling with the final entry. Status, Expendable Asset. Recommended action upon ship compromise, disposal. The 3 humans stared at the wounded creature in silence. It had noticed their lights and raised its head to watch them, its glowing eyes showing unmistakable intelligence. There was no fear in those eyes, no aggression. Only a deep, weary resignation, as if it had been waiting for its own death for a very long time. "They were going to kill it," James said quietly. "Their own battle companion. They were going to kill it rather than try to evacuate it. Look at the loyalty programming interface," Marcus said, pointing to another panel. "They had this thing mentally conditioned to fight and die for them, and their response to danger was to write it off as disposable." Sarah felt a familiar fire building in her chest, the same anger that had driven her father to spend his life helping colonies that the major powers had written off as not economically viable. It was the fury that came from watching those with power treat life as a commodity to be discarded when convenient. "We're taking it with us," she said. "Sarah," James said carefully, "we don't know anything about its biology, its needs, its potential dangers. For all we know, it could be programmed to kill anyone who isn't Krillian." "Then, we'll figure it out," she replied, already working on the chamber's control interface. "We'll learn what it needs, we'll help it heal, and we'll give it something the Krillians never did, a choice about its own future." "The ship's barely holding together as it is," Marcus pointed out. "We don't have resources for a passenger, especially one we know nothing about." Sarah stopped working and turned to face her friends. 20 years ago, a Terran medical ship found a little human girl floating in an escape pod near the ruins of Vega Colony. The girl's parents were dead, her home was gone, and she had nothing but the clothes on her back. That ship could have dropped her off at the nearest refugee center and continued on their mission. Instead, they took her in, taught her everything they knew, and gave her a reason to keep living. She gestured toward the creature in the chamber. "I was that little girl. And, today, this creature is me. So we're taking it with us, because that's what humans do. We save who we can, when we can, because life is precious. All life." Marcus and James exchanged a look, then Marcus grinned. "Well, when you put it that way, how can we say no? James, what do you need to set up a temporary medical bay for our new friend? Give me an hour to run some biological scans and prepare the quarantine section, James replied. And, Sarah? Your father would be proud. As they worked to free the creature from its prison, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were changing more than just one animal's fate. In the depths of space, surrounded by the wreckage of a mighty warship, 3 humans were about to prove once again that the galaxy's deadliest predators were also its most compassionate protectors. The creature watched them work with growing alertness, its glowing eyes tracking their movements as they carefully dismantled the chamber's restraining systems. When Sarah finally opened the containment door, it didn't try to flee or attack. Instead, it slowly, painfully, dragged itself to the opening and looked up at her with an expression she could only describe as hope. "Hello there," she said softly, extending her hand. "My name is Sarah, and we're here to help." The creature sniffed her gloved hand carefully, then gently touched its nose to her palm. In that moment, as 2 vastly different species made first contact in the ruins of war, Sarah knew their lives had just become infinitely more complicated. And she couldn't wait to see what happened next. Moving the injured creature from the Krillian wreckage to the persistent dream proved to be more challenging than Sarah had anticipated. The being was larger than it had appeared in the containment chamber, roughly the size of a German shepherd but with a more robust build. Its scales shifted color subtly as they worked around it, darkening when it felt stressed and lightening when James spoke to it in soothing tones. "Fascinating," James murmured as he ran his portable scanner over the creature. "Its vital signs are stable, but the physiology is unlike anything in the medical databases. The luminescent blood appears to carry both nutrients and some kind of bioelectric charge. And look at this neural activity." He showed Sarah and Marcus the scanner readout. The brain patterns were incredibly complex, showing levels of cognitive activity that rivaled most sapient species. But there were also strange gaps in the neural mapping, areas that seemed deliberately suppressed. "The Krillians did something to its mind," Sarah said grimly. "These look like surgical modifications." "Or programming interfaces," Marcus added, his engineering background helping him interpret the data. "They didn't just train this creature, they hardwired it for obedience. Look at these neural pathways. They're artificial constructs overlaid on the natural brain structure." The creature, which they had temporarily named Shadow until they could learn its real designation, watched their examination with patient intelligence. When James accidentally brushed against one of its wounds, it flinched but didn't pull away or try to bite. The level of self-control was remarkable for an animal in pain. "It's not just intelligent," Sarah realized. "It's actively choosing to trust us." They had rigged a temporary containment area in the cargo bay, using emergency medical equipment and environmental controls to create a safe space for their unexpected passenger. Shadow moved into the area willingly, even helping them by lying still while James attached monitoring equipment. "The bone break in its rear leg is clean," James reported after a thorough examination. "I can set it with the equipment we have. The lacerations are deeper, but they're already showing signs of accelerated healing. Whatever the species is, they're remarkably resilient." "Resilient enough to survive whatever destroyed a Krillian battlecruiser," Marcus pointed out. "That makes me curious about what they were running from." As if summoned by his words, the persistent Dream's long-range sensors began chiming with an urgent alert. Sarah rushed to the bridge, leaving James to continue treating Shadow while Marcus checked their position. "Sarah," Marcus called, his voice tight with concern. "We've got incoming ships. 3 of them, approaching fast from the direction of the Krillian home system." The scanner display showed 3 vessels moving toward their position at high speed. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the configuration: Krillian military corvettes, fast attack ships designed for pursuit and capture. "They're hailing us," Marcus reported. Sarah activated the communication system. The face that appeared on the main screen was typically Krillian, 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor plating, with fierce golden eyes and an expression of barely contained aggression. The translation matrix identified him as Squadron Leader Throkvash. "Human vessel," the Krillian commander's voice boomed through the speakers, "you are trespassing in a restricted military zone. Prepare to be boarded for inspection." "Squadron Leader," Sarah replied, keeping her voice calm and professional, "this is Captain Sarah Chen of the independent cargo hauler Persistent Dream. We're responding to a distress signal from your battlecruiser. Are there survivors who need assistance?" The Krillian's expression darkened. "There are no survivors. The ship was lost in combat with hostile forces. You will submit to inspection and surrender any military assets recovered from the wreckage. Sarah felt her blood run cold. They knew about Shadow. Somehow, they knew. I'm not sure what you mean by military assets, she said carefully. We've only recovered some personal effects and equipment for proper disposal. Do not attempt deception, human. Our bioscanners detect the presence of Combat Unit 47 aboard your vessel. That creature is Krillian military property and will be returned immediately. Behind her, Sarah heard the soft sound of claws on metal decking. She turned to see Shadow standing in the doorway to the bridge, having somehow escaped from its containment area. The creature's scales had shifted to a deep black, and its glowing eyes were fixed on the Krillian commander's image with unmistakable recognition. Ah, Throckvash said, noticing the creature on the screen. There you are, faithful Hound. Return to your masters and accept your fate with honor. What happened next shocked everyone on the bridge. Shadow looked at the Krillian commander, then deliberately turned its back on the screen and walked over to Sarah, sitting down beside her chair in an unmistakable gesture of choice. The Krillian's face flushed with anger. Impossible. The loyalty conditioning cannot be overridden. Combat Unit 47, you will obey Krillian command and return immediately. Shadow's response was to move closer to Sarah, its scales shifting to a lighter color that somehow seemed defiant. Fascinating, came James's voice over the comm system. He had been monitoring the exchange from the medical bay. Sarah, I think you need to see what I just discovered about our friend's neural patterns. Later, James, Sarah said, not taking her eyes off the Krillian commander. We have a situation here. No, you need to see this now. Those neural modifications the Krillians made? They're breaking down. The creature's natural brain patterns are reasserting themselves, and they're unlike anything I've ever seen. Sarah, this isn't just an intelligent animal. The base neural structure suggests full sapience. This is a person, not a pet. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The Krillians hadn't just abandoned a war animal, they had left behind a sentient being, one they had apparently enslaved and mentally modified to serve as a weapon. Squadron leader, Sarah said, her voice harder now, I need to ask you directly. Is Combat Unit 47 a sapient being? The creature's original intelligence level is irrelevant, Throckvash replied dismissively. It has been properly conditioned for military service and is classified as equipment. Its thoughts, if any, belong to the Krillian military. That's not an answer, Sarah pressed. Yes or no, is this creature naturally sapient? The Krillian's silence was answer enough. I see, Sarah said quietly. Squadron leader, I'm afraid I have to inform you that under Galactic Council Resolution 2847, no sapient being can be classified as property, regardless of species or origin. The creature you're referring to as Combat Unit 47 has the right to determine its own fate. Human law does not apply to Krillian military assets, Throckvash snarled. Surrender the creature or we will take it by force. Marcus, Sarah said calmly, please transmit our current position and status to the nearest Galactic Council monitoring station. Include a full recording of this conversation. Already done, Marcus replied grimly. But their closest patrol ship is 6 hours away. These corvettes will reach us in 20 minutes. Sarah looked down at Shadow, who was watching the exchange with obvious understanding. The creature's eyes met hers, and, in that moment, she saw not the blank stare of a trained animal, but the desperate hope of a person asking for help. Squadron Leader Throckvash, Sarah said, standing up straighter, I hereby formally refuse your demand. The being you call Combat Unit 47 has chosen to remain aboard this vessel, and, as a sapient creature, that choice is legally protected under interstellar law. Then, you have chosen death, human, the Krillian replied. My ships are armed and authorized to use force to recover military property. The communication channel closed, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Well, Marcus said after a moment, that could have gone better. James, Sarah called over the comm, how quickly can you get our friend mobile? Because I think we're about to need everyone at their best. The bone break will take time to heal properly, but I can rig a temporary support that will let it move around. Why? Sarah was already moving to the weapons controls, such as they were on a cargo hauler. Because 3 Krillian corvettes are about to try to take our passenger by force, and I don't think they're going to be gentle about it. Sarah, Marcus said carefully, you know we can't fight military corvettes with a cargo hauler. They outgun us 50-1. Maybe, Sarah replied, powering up their defensive systems. But, they want Shadow alive and intact. That gives us some advantages. She turned to look at Shadow, who was still sitting beside her chair. Listen, friend, I don't know if you can understand everything I'm saying, but here's the situation. Your former masters are coming to take you back. They want to restore your conditioning and turn you back into their weapon. We can try to run, but they'll probably catch us. Or you can choose to go with them and spare us the fight. Shadow tilted its head, considering her words. Then, it stood up, walked over to the weapons console, and placed one clawed paw on the activation switch. The meaning was clear, it was choosing to fight for its freedom. James, Sarah called, forget the medical support. Get up here and help us figure out how to keep our friend free. On my way, James replied. And, Sarah? I've been analyzing the data from the Krillian ship. I think I know what destroyed that battlecruiser, and it wasn't enemy weapons. What do you mean? The damage patterns, the energy signatures, the way the metal was twisted, it's consistent with a massive psionic discharge. Something with incredible psychic power tore that ship apart from the inside. Sarah looked at Shadow with new understanding. Something like a telepathic creature whose mental conditioning suddenly failed? Exactly. Sarah, I think our friend here was responsible for destroying its own prison. And if the Krillians are determined to recapture it, they might be planning to make sure it can never break free again. The countdown timer on the tactical display showed 18 minutes until the Krillian ships arrived. Sarah made her decision. All right, people. And, person, she added, nodding to Shadow. We're going to do something incredibly stupid and, probably suicidal. We're going to show the galaxy what happens when someone threatens the innocent under a human's protection. She activated the ship's general intercom. Computer, record message for transmission on all emergency frequencies. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the independent vessel Persistent Dream. We are currently harboring a sapient being who has requested asylum from Krillian military forces. The creature has been subjected to illegal mental conditioning and was scheduled for termination by its captors. We are requesting immediate assistance from any Galactic Council vessels in the area. She paused, looking around at her crew and their unlikely ally. And, to anyone listening who thinks that might makes right, who believes that the strong can treat the weak as property, I want you to know something important. My name is Sarah Chen. My species is human. And, as long as there's breath in my body, no one under my protection will be dragged back into slavery. The message began transmitting across all frequencies as the Krillian ships continued their approach. In 17 minutes, they would find out if 3 humans and 1 liberated alien could stand against the might of one of the galaxy's most feared military forces. Shadow pressed against Sarah's leg, its scales shifting to a warm gold color. In whatever way it could communicate, it was saying thank you. Don't thank me yet, Sarah murmured, watching the approaching ships on her scanner. Thank me if we're all still alive in an hour. The 3 Krillian corvettes dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their sleek hulls bristling with weapon ports and scanner arrays. Sarah watched them approach on the tactical display, her hands steady on the controls despite her racing heart. The Persistent Dream was barely a speck compared to the military vessels bearing down on them. They're targeting our engines, Marcus reported from his station. Looks like they want to disable us rather than destroy us outright. That's something, at least, James said, though his voice was tight with tension. He had jury-rigged a combat harness for Shadow, allowing the creature to move around the bridge despite its injured leg. How long until the Galactic Council patrol arrives? 5.5 hours, Sarah replied grimly. Might as well be 5.5 years. Shadow padded over to the main view screen, its scales shifting to match the deep black of space. The creature's glowing blue eyes were fixed on the approaching ships with an intensity that made the air around it seem to vibrate. Is it just me, Marcus asked quietly, or is the temperature on the bridge dropping? Sarah checked the environmental controls. Temperature's normal. But, there's something else. James, are you picking up any unusual energy readings? Now that you mention it, yes. Low-level psychic emanations, growing stronger by the minute. It's coming from Shadow. The creature turned to look at them, and Sarah could have sworn she heard a voice in her mind, not words exactly, but concepts and emotions conveyed directly to her consciousness. Gratitude. Determination. And, underneath it all, a deep, burning anger at those who had enslaved it. Shadow, she said carefully, can you understand us? Really understand us, not just respond to commands? The creature nodded once, a distinctly humanoid gesture that looked strange on its alien form. Can you communicate with us? Beyond the mental contact? Shadow moved to the communication console and touched one of the interfaces with a careful claw. The universal translator activated, and, when it spoke, its voice was rich and melodious, nothing like the growls and barks Sarah had expected. I understand, Captain Chen. I have understood everything since the moment you freed me from the conditioning chamber. I chose to remain silent because... It paused, as if searching for the right words. Because I was not certain I deserved to have a voice. The bridge fell silent. James was the first to speak. What's your name? Your real name, not the designation they gave you. I was called Kethvar before the Krillians found my people. In our language, it means one who walks between stars. I have not spoken it aloud in 7 years. Kethvar, Sarah repeated, testing the pronunciation. It's a beautiful name. Can you tell us what happened to your people? The creature's scales darkened with remembered pain. The Krillians found our world during one of their expansion campaigns. My people, the Zarathi, were not warriors. We were explorers, philosophers, artists. We had psychic abilities, but we used them for communication and healing, not warfare. Let me guess, Marcus said bitterly. The Krillians saw potential weapons instead of people. Exactly. They conquered our world and took the strongest of us for their military program. They used surgical implants and conditioning drugs to suppress our personalities and enhance our combat abilities. We became their shadow units, living weapons that could phase partially out of normal spacetime during battle. Sarah felt sick. How many of your people did they take? 300 of us, initially. I do not know how many remain alive. The conditioning process has a high mortality rate, and combat casualties are considered acceptable losses. The proximity alarms began sounding as the Krillian ships closed to engagement range. Squadron leader Throkvash's voice crackled over the communication system. Human vessel, this is your final warning. Surrender Combat Unit 47 immediately or face the consequences. Sarah activated the reply channel. Squadron leader, this is Captain Chen. The being you're referring to is named Kethvar, and they are a free sapient individual under the protection of this vessel. We will not surrender them. The creature is Krillian military property and will be returned. You have 10 seconds to comply. Kethvar, Sarah said quickly, are you willing to fight alongside us? Captain, I have dreamed of this moment for 7 years. Yes, I am willing to fight for my freedom. Then, let's show these bastards what happens when they mess with our friends. The first energy blast from the lead corvette struck the persistent Dream S shields, causing the entire ship to shudder. Sarah rolled the ship to port, using a piece of debris from the battlecruiser as cover while Marcus rerouted power to the defensive systems. We can't keep this up for long, Marcus called out. Their weapons are tearing through our shields like paper. That was when Kethvar did something unexpected. The Zarathi moved to the center of the bridge and sat down, its eyes beginning to glow brighter. The air around it started to shimmer, and Sarah could feel pressure building behind her eyes. Kethvar, what are you doing? Something I have not been able to do since they put the control implants in my brain, the creature replied, its voice taking on an otherworldly echo. I am going to show the Krillians what a free Zarathi can accomplish. The temperature on the bridge plummeted as Kethvar's psychic abilities fully awakened. Frost began forming on the console edges, and Sarah could see her breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. But, more importantly, she could feel something vast and powerful reaching out from their small ship toward the attacking corvettes. Impossible, came Throkvash's voice over the comms, now tinged with fear. The conditioning implants prevent this level of psychic manifestation. You made a mistake, Squadron Leader, Kethvar's voice boomed through the communication system, somehow transmitted through psychic energy alone. You assumed your chains were unbreakable. But, you forgot one thing about my people, we are strongest when we choose to protect those we love. The lead Krillian corvette suddenly stopped firing. Its lights flickered, and Sarah could see through the viewscreen that ice was forming on its hull. The ship began to drift, its engines failing as the electronics systems succumbed to the supernatural cold emanating from Kethvar's psychic assault. "What's happening?" James asked in amazement. "Kethvar is doing to them what they did to their own battlecruiser," Sarah realized. That's how the ship was destroyed. It wasn't an enemy attack. It was Kethvar breaking free of the conditioning and unleashing 7 years of suppressed rage. The second corvette opened fire on the persistent Dream, but its shots went wide as the ship's targeting systems began malfunctioning. Kethvar's psychic influence was spreading, affecting the electronic systems of all 3 ships simultaneously. "This is Squadron Leader Throkvash to all units," came the panicked transmission. "Retreat immediately. The creature has broken all conditioning protocols. Retreat before it destroys us all." But Kethvar wasn't finished. The Zarathi stood up, its form somehow seeming larger than before, as if it existed partially in another dimension. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of 300 enslaved souls. "No, Squadron Leader. You came here to reclaim your property. But I am not your property. I never was. And neither were any of my people." The third corvette tried to jump to hyperspace, but its engines failed as Kethvar's psychic influence reached across space to disable its drive systems. All 3 ships were now drifting helplessly, their crews undoubtedly struggling with failing life support and communications. "Kethvar," Sarah said gently, "that's enough. You've made your point." The Zarathi turned to look at her, and, for a moment Sarah saw not the gentle, grateful creature they had rescued, but the full fury of a people who had suffered genocide and enslavement. Then, Kethvar blinked, and the moment passed. "You are right, Captain. Revenge is not justice. And you have taught me something important about choosing who I wish to be." The psychic pressure in the air began to ease, and the temperature started returning to normal. The Krillian ships remained disabled but intact, their crews alive but thoroughly defeated. "This is Captain Chen to Squadron Leader Throkvash," Sarah broadcast. "Your ships are disabled but not destroyed. I suggest you use your emergency beacons to call for rescue, then have a long conversation with your superiors about the difference between equipment and people." There was a long pause before Throkvash replied, his voice subdued. "Understood, Captain. But know this, the Krillian military will not forget this incident. You have made powerful enemies today." "Good," Sarah replied. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to enslave someone's friends." As the immediate threat passed, James began running scans on Kethvar, who was swaying slightly from the effort of the psychic assault. "Are you all right?" That was an incredible display of power. "I am tired," Kethvar admitted. "It has been 7 years since I was able to access my full abilities. The experience was overwhelming, but also liberating. For the first time since my capture, I feel like myself again." "The question now," Marcus said, checking the long-range scanners, "is what do we do next? Word of this is going to spread throughout the galaxy. Every military force is going to want to either capture Kethvar or eliminate the threat they represent." "We do what humans have always done," Sarah said firmly. "We protect our friends and we find them a safe place to build a new life." "Kethvar, do you know if any of your people are still alive? Still free?" The Zarathi's scales shifted to a hopeful blue-green. "There were rumors, before my capture, of Zarathi settlements in the unexplored regions beyond the galactic rim. Refugees from the earliest Krillian raids who escaped into deep space. If they still exist. Then, that's where we're going," Sarah decided. "James, Marcus, plot a course for the galactic rim. We're going to help our friend find his people." "That's going to be dangerous," James warned. "The unexplored regions are full of unknowns, hostile aliens, dangerous phenomena, uncharted hazards." "More dangerous than staying here and waiting for every military force in the galaxy to come hunting for us?" Sarah asked. "Point taken," Marcus grinned. "Besides, when has dangerous ever stopped us before?" As the persistent Dream turned away from the disabled Krillian ships and headed for the edge of civilized space, Sarah looked at their new friend and crew member. "Kethvar, I want you to know that you'll always have a place with us, whether we find your people or not. You're not property, you're not a weapon, and you're not alone. You're family." The Zarathi's scale shifted to a warm golden color that Sarah was beginning to recognize as contentment. "Thank you, Captain." In my language, there is a phrase, Velkath Moranis. It means the stars smile upon unexpected friendship. I believe this is such a moment. I like that, Sarah said, watching the stars will by as they entered hyperspace. The stars smile upon unexpected friendship. I think that's going to be the new motto of the persistent dream. Behind them, 3 disabled Krillian ships sent out distress calls, their crews having learned a valuable lesson about the cost of treating people as property. And, ahead of them lay the unknown dangers of uncharted space, where they would discover that rescuing one enslaved being was only the beginning of their journey. But, for now, in the quiet of hyperspace, 3 humans and 1 liberated Zarathi shared a moment of peace, bound together by the simple truth that had driven humanity across the stars, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is choose to help a stranger in need. 3 weeks into their journey toward the galactic rim, the persistent dream encountered its first major obstacle. The ship's navigation computer began displaying warning alerts as they approached a region of space that appeared completely empty on long-range sensors, but registered massive gravitational anomalies. It's like space itself is broken here, Marcus reported, studying the sensor readings with growing concern. The gravitational fields are shifting randomly, and there are energy signatures that don't match anything in our databases. Sarah moved to his station to examine the data herself. They were still 2 days from the coordinates Kethvar had provided for the possible Zarathi settlements, but the space between them and their destination was proving more treacherous than anticipated. Kethvar, she called to their friend, who was in the cargo bay practicing with his restored psychic abilities, can you come look at these readings? Do you recognize any of these energy signatures? The Zarathi padded onto the bridge, moving much more smoothly now that James had successfully treated his injuries. His scales showed the deep blue-green that they had learned indicated concentration as he studied the navigation displays. Yes, he said quietly. This is a void maze. My people created them as defensive barriers around our hidden settlements. The gravitational distortions are generated by psychic resonance fields that fold spacetime in on itself. Defensive barriers against what? James asked, joining them from the medical bay where he had been cataloging Zarathi physiology for future reference. Against anyone who might follow us, Kethvar replied. The Zarathi who escaped to the rim regions were desperate to ensure they could never be found by slave hunters. The void mazes are nearly impossible to navigate without psychic guidance. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Nearly impossible? What happens if we get it wrong? The gravitational distortions will tear the ship apart, or trap us in a spatial fold where we will drift forever, unable to find our way back to normal space. Wonderful, Marcus muttered. So we need psychic navigation to reach your people, but using psychic abilities is exactly what will alert anyone following us to our position. Actually, Kethvar said, his scale shifting to a more optimistic green, that may not be a problem. Captain, do you trust me to guide your ship through the maze? Sarah didn't hesitate. Completely. What do you need us to do? I will need to link my consciousness with your navigation system. It will allow me to sense the safe pathways through the gravitational distortions and guide us to the hidden settlement. But there is a risk. There's always a risk, Sarah replied. What kind of risk? During the psychic link, I will be connected to all of your ship's systems. If something goes wrong, if my conditioning reasserts itself or if the Krillian implants activate, I could potentially take control of the entire ship. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. James was the first to speak. Kethvar, those implants were designed to make you loyal to the Krillians. Are you certain they're completely inactive? No, Kethvar admitted. I am not certain. The neural modifications run deep, and I have been free for less than a month. There could be dormant programming that I am not aware of. So let me get this straight, Marcus said slowly. To reach safety, we need to let someone with unknown Krillian mind control programming link directly to our ship's brain. And if something goes wrong, we could end up as prisoners of our own passenger. That's about the size of it, Sarah agreed. And we're going to do it anyway, James added, because that's who we are. Because that's who we are, Sarah confirmed. Kethvar, what do you need from us to make this work? The Zarathi scales shifted to a warm golden color. Your trust, Captain. And perhaps your help in monitoring my mental state during the link. If you see any signs that I am losing control, you must be prepared to sever the connection immediately. How would we do that? Marcus asked. Emergency shutdown of all navigation systems, Kethvar explained. It will leave us drifting in the void maze, but it will break the psychic link before I can do any damage. Sarah made her decision. All right, people. Let's set up for psychic navigation. Marcus, prepare the emergency shutdown procedures. James, I want you monitoring Kethvar's vital signs throughout the process. And, Kethvar? Yes, Captain? Thank you for trusting us with the truth about the risks. That takes real courage. The setup process took several hours. Marcus had to modify the navigation console to accept psychic input, while James prepared a comprehensive monitoring system to track Kethvar's neural activity. As they worked, Sarah found herself thinking about the decision they were making. A month ago, she had been a simple cargo hauler captain, worried about keeping her ship running and her crew fed. Now she was about to risk everything to help a liberated slave reach his people, guided by technology that could potentially turn their friend into their captor. Second thoughts? James asked, noticing her expression. Always, Sarah replied. But that doesn't mean we stop doing what's right. Even when what's right might get us killed. Especially then. My father used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they do when it's safe and easy. It's what they do when doing the right thing might cost them everything. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was. And he would have liked Kethvar. Dad always said you could judge a person's character by how they treated those who couldn't help them in return. When the preparations were complete, they gathered on the bridge for the attempt. Kethvar positioned himself at the modified navigation console, his clawed hands resting on the new psychic interface panels that Marcus had installed. Remember, Sarah said, at the first sign of trouble, we shut everything down. No heroics, no second chances. We trust each other, but we also protect each other. Understood, Captain, Kethvar replied. Beginning psychic link, now. The change was immediate and dramatic. The lights on the bridge dimmed as power was rerouted through the psychic interface, and the air began to shimmer with the same energy that had accompanied Kethvar's attack on the Krillian ships. But, this time, the sensation was different. Instead of cold fury, there was a warm, guiding presence that seemed to fill the ship. Link established, Kethvar reported, though his voice now had an otherworldly echo. I can see the pathways through the void maze. They are beautiful. Like rivers of light flowing through folded space. Vital signs are stable, James reported. No signs of mental distress or foreign programming activation. Navigation sensors are responding to psychic guidance, Marcus added. I'm seeing safe passage routes that weren't visible before. It's like having a new sense. Sarah watched the main view screen as their surroundings seemed to change. What had appeared to be empty space now showed shimmering corridors of twisted starlight, pathways that curved and flowed in directions that shouldn't have been possible. This is incredible, she breathed. How did your people learn to create something like this? The Zarathi have always been able to perceive dimensions beyond normal spacetime, Kethvar explained, his consciousness somehow present both in the navigation system and speaking through his physical body. We see reality as a layered structure, where thought and matter intersect. The void mazes simply make use of those intersections. They had been navigating through the maze for almost an hour when the first alarm sounded. James was staring at his medical scanners with growing alarm. Sarah, I'm seeing some unusual neural activity. There's a secondary pattern emerging in Kethvar's brain scans. What kind of pattern? Sarah asked, her hand moving toward the emergency shutdown controls. I'm not sure. It's not matching any of the Krillian conditioning signatures we identified earlier, but it's definitely artificial. Something that was added to his natural brain patterns. Kethvar's physical body remained motionless at the navigation console, but his voice carried a note of strain when he spoke. I feel it too. Something awakening in my mind. But it does not feel like Krillian programming. Should we abort? Marcus asked. Wait, Kethvar said urgently. I think these are not control implants. They are something else entirely. Memory engrams, perhaps. Information that was hidden in my mind. Hidden by whom? Sarah asked. By my own people, before my capture. Captain, I believe the Zarathi elders implanted memories in all of us who were taken by the Krillians. Information about our hidden settlements, our defensive measures, perhaps even plans for resistance. The secondary neural pattern grew stronger, and, suddenly, Kethvar gasped as new memories flooded his consciousness. Through the psychic link, the humans caught glimpses of what he was experiencing, images of a hidden world beyond the galactic rim, populated by Zarathi who had built a new civilization in exile. The settlement, Kethvar said, his voice filled with wonder. I can see it. New Zarath, they call it. Thousands of my people, free and rebuilding our culture. But there is more. What kind of more? Sarah asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. They have been waiting for us. For the liberated slaves to find them. They have prepared ships, weapons, plans for striking back at those who enslaved us. The hidden memories contain the locations of other slave camps, the schedules of transport ships, the vulnerabilities of the Krillian military infrastructure. The implications were staggering. What they had thought was a simple rescue mission to return one being to his people was actually the first step in a much larger plan, a plan to liberate hundreds of enslaved Zarathi and strike back at their captors. Kethvar, Sarah said carefully, what exactly are your people planning? Freedom, Captain. Not just for the Zarathi, but for all the species the Krillians have enslaved over the centuries. We are not the only ones they have taken for their military programs. There are dozens of other races suffering under their conditioning protocols. A rebellion, James said quietly. They're planning a slave rebellion. More than that, Kethvar replied. They are planning to end the Krillian slave trade forever. To make it too costly and dangerous for any species to ever again consider enslaving another. Sarah looked around at her crew, seeing the same mix of excitement and apprehension in their faces that she felt in her own heart. They had rescued one being from slavery, only to discover that they had stumbled into something much larger, a war for the freedom of countless enslaved people across the galaxy. Well, she said finally, I guess we're not just cargo haulers anymore. No, Kethvar agreed, his scales shifting to a determined silver color. If you are willing, Captain Chen, you and your crew have just become the newest members of the Zarathi Liberation Fleet. As they continued through the void maze toward their destination, Sarah realized that their small act of compassion had grown into something none of them had anticipated. They were no longer just trying to save one friend, they were about to help start a revolution. And, despite the dangers ahead, she couldn't think of anywhere else she would rather be. The hidden world of New Zarath was unlike anything Sarah had ever imagined. As the persistent dream emerged from the final fold of the void maze, she found herself staring at a planet that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The surface appeared solid and normal, but ghostly secondary images of the same landmasses flickered in and out of visibility, showing what looked like alternate versions of the same world. Psychic dimensional anchoring, Kethvar explained, his consciousness finally separating from the navigation systems as they entered normal space around the planet. My people have learned to exist partially outside of normal spacetime. It makes the world nearly impossible to find, and even if someone does locate it, they cannot attack what they cannot fully perceive. Ingenious, Marcus breathed, studying the sensor readings. I'm detecting a population of approximately 50,000 Zarathi, plus smaller numbers of at least 6 other species. Other refugees, Kethvar said, his scales showing the warm gold of homecoming. The Zarathi have always welcomed those fleeing oppression. It seems that tradition continues even in exile. They were guided to a landing platform by gentle psychic impulses that felt like welcoming thoughts given form. As the ship settled onto the crystalline surface, Sarah could see crowds of Zarathi gathering to greet them. Many bore the scars of escaped slaves, missing limbs that had been replaced with psychic prosthetics, burn marks from torture, and the haunted look in their eyes that spoke of terrible memories. But there was also hope. Children played among the adults, their scales bright with curiosity and joy. Elders moved with dignity and purpose. This was not a broken people hiding in exile, this was a civilization that had rebuilt itself and was preparing to strike back. The first to greet them as they disembarked was an elderly Zarathi whose scales had faded to silver with age, but whose eyes burned with fierce intelligence. She embraced Kethvar with obvious relief and joy before turning to address the human crew. I am Elder Vashti, she said, her voice carrying the musical quality common to all Zarathi but deepened with age and authority. We have been watching your journey through our psychic networks. What you have done for our son Kethvar has not gone unnoticed. You have our eternal gratitude. We just did what anyone should do, Sarah replied. We helped a friend in need. Ah, but that is where you are wrong, Captain Chen. Most species would not have risked their lives for a stranger. Most would not have defied military vessels to protect someone who could offer them nothing in return. What you did was not common, it was extraordinary. And it is why we wish to make you an offer. Elder Vashti gestured for them to follow her deeper into the settlement. As they walked, Sarah marveled at the architecture around them. The buildings seemed to be grown rather than constructed, flowing organic shapes that pulsed gently with bioluminescent lighting. Gardens filled with alien plants created pockets of beauty throughout the city, and everywhere she looked, people moved with purpose and determination. For 70 years, we have been preparing, the elder explained as they walked. Gathering intelligence, developing new technologies, training warriors and rescuers. We knew that eventually, liberated slaves would begin finding their way to us, and, when they did, it would be time to begin the final phase of our plan. They entered a vast chamber at the center of the settlement, its walls covered with holographic displays showing star maps, ship schematics, and detailed intelligence reports. Dozens of Zarathi and representatives of other species worked at various stations, coordinating what was clearly a massive operation. "Welcome to the Liberation Command Center," Elder Vashti said. "From here, we coordinate rescue operations across 17 different sectors. In the past year alone, we have freed over 300 enslaved beings from various military and civilian programs." James whistled in amazement. "This is incredible. How long have you been planning this?" "Since the day the first Zarathi refugees arrived here," replied another voice. Sarah turned to see a being that was clearly not Zarathi, humanoid but, with crystalline skin that refracted light in rainbow patterns. "I am Coordinator Zephyrin of the Veldris Collective. My people were enslaved by the hegemony of Sarek for forced labor. The Zarathi rescued us 8 years ago. How many species are represented here?" Marcus asked. 14 so far," Elder Vashti replied. "And the number grows with each successful rescue operation. But we have reached a critical point in our planning. The slaveholding powers are beginning to coordinate their responses to our activities. Soon, they will unite against us, and our window of opportunity will close." She led them to a massive holographic display showing the central sectors of the galaxy. Red markers indicated known slave facilities, while blue markers showed liberation fleet positions and safe houses. In 6 months, the major slave-holding powers will convene the Dominion Conference on their capital world of Hegemon Prime. It will be the largest gathering of our enemies in recorded history, military leaders, slave traders, and government officials from across the galaxy, all in one location. Sarah began to understand. "You're planning to hit them while they're all together." "Not just hit them," Elder Vashti corrected. "We plan to end their ability to enslave others permanently. The intelligence we have gathered indicates that they are planning to expand their operations significantly. New species have been identified for resource acquisition, including several pre-spaceflight civilizations that cannot defend themselves." "Including Earth?" James asked quietly. The elder's silence was answer enough. "That's impossible," Marcus protested. "Earth is under Galactic Council protection. They can't just." "The Galactic Council has been infiltrated," Coordinator Zephyrin explained gently. "Several member species have been secretly participating in the slave trade for decades. When the time comes, they will find excuses to remove Earth's protected status." Sarah felt a cold rage building in her chest. The same anger that had driven her to defy the Krillian squadron was now focused on a much larger threat. "What do you need from us?" "Your ship, your expertise, and, most importantly, your humanity," Elder Vashti replied. "You see, Captain Chen, the Liberation Fleet has a weakness. We are all former slaves or descendants of slaves. We think like victims, even after all these years. We plan cautious rescues and defensive operations because we have been conditioned to see ourselves as powerless." "But humans don't think that way," Kefvar added, his scales shifting to an admiring blue. "You see a problem and you attack it directly. You see injustice and you confront it head-on. You rescued me not because it was safe or profitable, but because it was right. We need that mindset for what comes next," the elder continued. "The operation we are planning is not a rescue mission or a defensive action. It is an assault on the very heart of the slave trade. We need someone who thinks like a predator, not prey." Sarah looked around at the command center, taking in the scope of what they were proposing. "You want us to help you plan and execute a military strike against the most powerful slave-holding forces in the galaxy. We want you to help us end slavery forever, Elder Vashti said simply. All slavery, everywhere, for all species. Will you join us? Sarah turned to Marcus and James. Her engineer was grinning with the same expression he'd worn when they decided to rescue Kethvar. James was nodding slowly, his medical training already calculating how many lives they could save. There's just one problem, Sarah said finally. We're not military strategists. We're cargo haulers who got lucky. No, Captain, Kethvar said, moving to stand beside her. You are humans. And, in the 3 weeks I have known you, I have learned that humans do not think in terms of what they cannot do. They think in terms of what must be done, and, then, they find a way to do it. Elder Vashti gestured to the holographic display, where hundreds of red markers showed the scope of the slavery problem across the galaxy. 50 million enslaved beings, Captain Chen. 50 million people like Kethvar, waiting for someone to care enough to set them free. Sarah stared at the display, thinking of Earth, of her father, of every principle that had guided her life. Then, she turned to face the assembled liberation leaders. All right, she said, her voice carrying the same determination that had driven humanity to the stars. Let's plan a revolution. The cheer that went up from the assembled beings was heard throughout the settlement. For the first time in generations, the enslaved peoples of the galaxy had found their champions. Not because humans were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but because they were the ones willing to stand up and fight when everyone else had given up hope. 6 months later, when the Liberation Fleet struck at Hegemon Prime and shattered the slave trade forever, historians would mark the moment when Captain Sarachin said yes as the turning point in galactic history. Not because of what she accomplished, but because of what she proved, that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is someone who refuses to accept that suffering is inevitable. The little cargo hauler Persistent Dream would go on to become the flagship of the Liberation Fleet, its hull scarred by 100 battles but its crew's determination unbroken. Marcus would design new weapons systems that could disable ships without killing their crews. James would develop medical protocols for treating conditioning damage that would save thousands of liberated slaves. And Kethvar would become the first Sarathi to command a human vessel, proving to the galaxy that freedom was not a human concept, but a universal one that anyone could learn to fight for. But, that night, as the 3 humans and their Zarathi friend shared a meal in the settlement's dining hall, surrounded by beings of a dozen different species all working toward the same goal, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. They had set out to save one life, and ended up changing the fate of millions. Not bad for a day's work, she murmured to herself. Did you say something, Captain? Kethvar asked. Just thinking out loud, Sarah replied, watching the children of various species playing together in the garden outside. Just thinking that maybe the galaxy isn't such a dark place after all. No, Kethvar agreed, his scales showing the warm gold of contentment. Not when there are humans in it. And, in that moment, surrounded by friends and allies who had chosen hope over despair, Sarachin knew that her father would have been proud. They had kept the promise that every human carried in their heart, to help where they could, protect where they must, and never, ever give up on the idea that tomorrow could be better than today. The revolution was just beginning. But, with humans leading the charge, the enslaved peoples of the galaxy finally had a reason to believe they could win.